In this episode of the show, I want to talk all about tracking because tracking has become hugely popular within the nutritional realm, nutritional field when it comes to dieting. Almost when we talk about calorie counting, there's a automatic link jump to MyFitnessPal. There's a link to I have to track calories. Now, you don't have to track calories in order to lose weight. You obviously have to know that calories count, but you don't have to count them. And even if you do want to go down the calorie tracking route, there are actually a whole host of ways that you can actually do it that don't mean that you're necessarily tracking macros to specific carbohydrate, fat, and protein numbers each and every day. Because often when you do that, it's quite overbearing. You feel like it's taking over your life, that you've got to hit this specific fat number, this specific carbohydrate number, this specific protein number each and every day. And therefore trying to drift off and maybe having some different foods says, oh fuck, I've now got too much protein. How do I kind of rebalance this? It just kind of has this really onerous level of commitment to managing your diet on a daily basis. And as you'll discover over the course of this episode of the show, there are actually ways of tracking that are a lot less time consuming and don't feel like you are ruled and governed by your nutrition. Because who the fuck wants to live life like that? Basically, you don't want to be in a situation whereby you think about every calorie, morsel, macro of food that is passing through your lips on a daily, hourly basis. That's not the way to create a sustainable way of managing your nutrition, because eventually you want to get to the stage where you're not tracking at all. Whereas if you're balls deep in macro tracking all the time and you haven't thought about other processes, other ways of doing it, other sort of non-tracking habit-based approaches, that transition away from tracking is going to be super difficult. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this episode of the show. But before we go on, if you are watching on YouTube, listening to it on podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you are listening or absorbing this piece of content, please, if you can subscribe, set those notifications, maybe even get a little review. That would be absolutely awesome. Really helps me grow the podcast, grow the show to be more than it is right now, so I can help loads more people. And obviously you enjoy these episodes of the show. I enjoy you listening, so wouldn't that be cool as well? And hey, why not give me a little shout out on social media, maybe a little screenshot or something in your Instagram stories. Who knows, whatever you kids like to enjoy these days. So let's look at some different tracking methods. Now, you may be aware of some of these. Some of them you might not even consider as tracking methods, but trust me, they are. First one is portion control. So this might be, you've all seen posts on Instagram or whatever about it's a fist-sized portion of protein, or is it fist-sized portion of carbohydrates, palm-sized portion of protein, 2 fists of vegetables, that sort of thing. So you're judging based on like portion control and things like that. Or you might be doing portion control in a slightly different way, but that first way is one of the most common ones that you will see when people are trying to specifically lose weight. But there are things you can do in terms of maybe take your plate and you can have half of it is veggies, quarter of it is carbohydrates, quarter of that plate is protein, and that's kind of a way to judge portions. So that is actually a form of tracking. You're consciously looking at what you're having in what quantities. That is a form of tracking what you're eating. Now, I'm going to go through these in kind of an order of ease. So like portion control is being the easiest. Full-on macro tracking is probably the most time-consuming. Let's say easiest, let's say time-consuming. So next one might be like protein tracking. So you don't necessarily have to track every single macro. You could just track protein. And as we'll come on to in a second, there's a specific reason and rationale why you would pick one of these different options. The next one is macro ranges. So rather than think about, okay, I've got to hit 123.25 grams of protein every single day, well, why don't you think about much broader ranges for those macros so that you give yourself that flexibility of different food choices and you feel like it doesn't necessarily matter if you're slightly up one day, slightly lower one day, and it makes that whole process less of a mind fuck, because that's what we want to get to, right? Next, we want to come to calorie tracking. Again, you would have ranges, but there's different levels to calorie tracking as well. Now, you might be someone who is busy at work and you've got this kind of stressful office job maybe, let's say, so you just kind of want to relax at the weekends. Therefore, an approach for you might be to track during the week. Now, you might want to set up your calories slightly differently, so you kind of give yourself a few more calories at the weekend when you're not tracking, to give yourself a bit of leeway of more, let's say, indulgent food choices or more calorie dense food choices. But effectively, you track Monday to Friday, and that might feel a little bit easier because most people within a working week, a working environment, it's kind of very much routine based. Often you'll get up at the same time, you'll get to work at the same time. Okay, the actual work itself might be a bit different, although as I can attest to from my office days, the work is the fucking same every single day. But you have this kind of routine, and meals might be at the same time, and therefore it becomes a lot easier to track those sorts of things. When it comes to the weekends, it could be the same. You want to really kind of just relax, unwind. You don't want to necessarily definitely don't want to think about freaking work. At least of all, you don't want to think about food. So maybe that gives you the opportunity then to just track on those weekdays, maybe pull the calories a little bit further down during the week to give you the flexibility at the weekend to kind of not necessarily go completely balls deep in abundance of eating a whole fucking Victoria sponge or something like that, but at least you have the flexibility to have other different foods. The other option would be to track every day. That would be your other option. Then lastly, you've got full-on macro tracking. So that's real specific, 3 specific numbers that you want to track for a specific reason. And we'll come on to those in a second. So when should you actually track? That might be a good place for us to start this conversation. Now, there are situations where you probably should track, and there are situations where you probably shouldn't track. So let's have a talk about those. Now, if you've got a specific outcome that you're trying to achieve, so maybe you are a bodybuilder who wants to get on stage, you're probably going to have to track. Almost definitely you're going to have to track of some description. The other thing is really important. If you want to, if you feel like you're a person, maybe you are like me, very type A personality, you like numbers, you like data, that gives you some sort of comfort, or you just enjoy that process. You enjoy a little bit of precision, and tracking to you doesn't necessarily feel onerous. So that's a good way of judging it. It could be personality driven as to whether you want to track or not. Now, if you're super motivated as well, super focused, again, you might enjoy that process of having that precision. You might be someone, when it comes to training, you enjoy like meticulously recording weights. You might meticulously record how you felt on an exercise, the reps, the sets, all that sort of stuff. You might just love that part of the process, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you've also got like a time-driven goal, let's say, for example, your wedding is coming up in 16 to 20 weeks time, and you want to lose as much weight as possible, let's say that's the goal, then tracking might help you be more focused within that short period of time. You can always support the process by having non-tracking methods alongside that. So when you finish that, say 16, 20-week period, you're not left in the lurch where all you've got is tracking. You can learn things along the way. That's important. So that was my other point, is that when you're supported by other habits, non-tracking things, so you're not just tracking, you're also learning at the same time. And that's a tactic I use with my clients quite frequently. So they come to me and they obviously want a specific result. They're trying to get a specific result in the shortest possible time frame. But what I want to do is make sure that they get through that process with good nutritional habits, with a good relationship with food. And therefore, when they finish, when they want to stop tracking, they feel like they've got the skills in which to do that. So if you have those two things in combination, tracking might not be so bad. And also the other one is if you've already got a good relationship with food. And by that, I would define that as you can manage and maintain your body weight without tracking already, and you don't consider food as good and bad. You can just eat and maintain your body weight. Now, you don't have to necessarily tick all of those boxes, but one or two of those different things would kind of lead you down the route of yes, that's for me. That is like tracking is going to be really, really good for me. Obviously, if tracking creates a poor relationship with food for you and it creates this kind of negativity, you feel trapped by MyFitnessPal, you kind of can't veer off of numbers for fear of fucking up your diet, that's probably a bad way to approach tracking. So just bear that in mind, that tracking is not essential. It's not for everybody. There are specific situations where it's beneficial, and it's just about judging what is right for you given the circumstances that you're in right now. Now, as I mentioned before, there are different methods to tracking, and there are different ways of using them for different scenarios and different circumstances. So for example, protein tracking, which I mentioned earlier, you might use that for someone who wants to build muscle, but they have a low level of commitment when it comes to tracking stuff in MyFitnessPal. So they might be super, super busy. They might just see this whole MyFitnessPal thing as too much of a headache, too much of a ball ache. So therefore, but they want to build muscle. And we know that protein frequency and total protein intake is important if you want to build muscle. So then you kind of meet that person at a halfway house to say, right, okay, I'm not going to get you to track everything. All I want you to do is track the protein that you're eating. And therefore, I just want you to have, let's say if it's a really specific muscle building goal they want, 4 to 6 servings of protein. Maybe you're saying, I want you to hit X amount of protein per meal, whatever. Then you just say, okay, track your protein. Forget the rest. Don't track carbs, don't track fat, all that sort of stuff. Again, muscle building, so it's less of an issue when it comes to calories. Obviously, you don't want to go too far into a surplus, but it means that you can kind of help that person achieve that goal without the onerous nature of full-on tracking. And obviously, again, supported with non-tracking methods, habits, things like that, you can help keep a lid on the calories and help manage them through that as well. Then when you kind of look at macro tracking, now that would be, for me, like if we're talking macro ranges rather than specific numbers, that would be if someone's got a very much a training focus and they could benefit from having the flexibility to say, for this particular training session, I know it's going to be tough, therefore I want to increase carbohydrate. So they've got this range that they can work in so that they don't necessarily go too low on fats, but they don't necessarily compromise carbohydrate, which could compromise their training session, gives them that flexibility. Also someone maybe who likes the numbers, but again, doesn't want to feel trapped by 3 specific numbers and then ending up with, you know, like fucking 0.5 grams of protein and fucking 25 grams of carbohydrates and whatever it is that's leaving them with this random shit at the end that they're trying to piece together some semblance of a meal, which then looks like a child's birthday party. But anyway, then you look at calorie tracking. So calorie tracking, well, I would use that time-dependent goal, or if someone has a preference to it, or if basically they have like maybe a performance goal and you want to make sure that they have the right level of energy available for that performance goal. So maybe if you've got an endurance athlete or really into specific training and things like that, that would also be good. Then you've got like calorie tracking on specific days. Now you would use that potentially for that flexibility at the weekend if you need it, or maybe even you've got a client or yourself is doing a intermittent fasting 5-2 diet. So you've got 2 days where it's low calorie, 5 days a bit more ad libitum, eat what you want type of days. Now on those low calorie days, obviously it's crucially important to make sure that you are having a low calorie day. So out of your 7-day period, your 2 low calorie days, you just track those 2 days to make sure you're hitting that low calorie target that allows you then to have those 5 days more ad libitum, if you want to call it that. Then when it comes to macro tracking, so your 3 specific numbers, that's really for a bodybuilder in peak week. Pretty much the only situation where you need 3 specific macro numbers to really, really focus in on. Now, when I'm working with a client, I would rarely use exact macros. In fact, I think I've only used it once, and that was for a powerlifter trying to make weight for a competition. So specifically lowering carbohydrates, depleting glycogen so that we can make weight, and all of those different sorts of things. That's the only time I've actually used it. Most of the time when I'm working with clients, obviously, as I said before, most of those clients are looking for time-specific goals. So tracking in most cases helps. Obviously, I have some clients where we don't track who have not got a time-dependent goal, but most of them fit in that time-driven goal. So we look at calories and we look at protein. They're the two things that we look in. And both of those are within ranges. So definitely not focusing in on you have to hit a specific number. It's a broad range that you can work within. And people are surprised when, particularly with protein, there's a massive range that you can work within. I will also give them an awareness of minimum fat. I won't say they have to hit a specific fat number, but I will make them aware that for health, hormone production, those sorts of things, that there is a minimum amount of fat that they should be having within their diets. So I make them aware of that. But in terms of those carbs and fat ratios, there's really a huge amount of variability that you can have. And it's not necessarily the case that you have to stick to these 3 macro numbers. But as with those clients, and what I would urge you to do is make a huge emphasis on habits. So making sure that you're not just blindly tracking in MyFitnessPal and just relying on this as your crutch for the rest of your life. Kind of use that MyFitnessPal tool, if you're tracking in some form or another, to educate yourself. Like, what foods are you eating? What foods are you eating that are like, are you eating lots of highly processed food? Are you not eating enough vegetables? Can you kind of really change what you're eating so that when you actually exit MyFitnessPal, you've got some habits you can rely on? So maybe that's eating vegetables with your main meals. Maybe it's having 20 to 30 grams of protein at every meal. Those things are kind of just like more habits that are less onerous ways of tracking that could help you in the future. So make sure that tracking is right for you. Don't feel like you have to follow the herd and you have to go headfirst into a tracking method, especially like full-on macro tracking, if you don't feel like it's for you. You can absolutely make 100% progress to the results you want without tracking a single calorie. But that doesn't make calorie tracking bad. It doesn't automatically mean that you're going to create a poor relationship with food. You just have to understand that there are things that you can do to prevent that happening. You're not there to use MyFitnessPal as this crutch, as this thing that you're going to rely on for the rest of your life. It is a tool within your toolbox, and you can use that at periods throughout your life in the future for specific reasons. So let's say, for example, that you are maintaining your weight well and at a decent level without tracking a single calorie. But when it comes to a holiday or something like that, you're maybe 8 weeks away from a holiday, you just want to lose a little bit of body fat just so you feel comfortable, whatever, that might be your thing. You can use calorie tracking for that period of 8 weeks. You're not necessarily relying on it for the rest of your life. So make sure that if you do go down a tracking route, that you use a tracking method that is appropriate for you from that list. So whether it's portion control, whether it's tracking protein, macro ranges, calories on weekdays or specific days of the week, and really kind of leave that specific 3 macro number tracking to those bodybuilders in peak week, or powerlifters, weightlifters, whatever, trying to make weight for specific events. It's really kind of that niche group that need to do that level of tracking. So make sure you're doing that. Then when you're doing that tracking, think about habits. What are the sustainable habits that you can put in place that are going to mean that you don't have to rely on tracking once you've achieved your goal? And think about ways in which you can transition away from tracking as well. That might be you're reducing the amount of meals that you are tracking, for example. You might start off by tracking every meal and sticking within a calorie range, for example. But then say, okay, well, I'm not going to track breakfast anymore. Then once you've kind of got that down pat, then you say, I'm not going to track lunch anymore. And now I'm just going to track my dinner. And then you just don't track anything after that. That could be one way of doing it. Very, very simplified, but it is an option for you. So hopefully you found this information useful. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of a light bulb moment in terms of not necessarily that you have to even track, but there's also other options out there. There really isn't one size fits all. There's just principles, and it's applying a method based on principles that works for you. That's the key thing that you need to think about when it comes to either losing weight, building muscle, or just maintaining whatever weight it is that you want to maintain. So I hope you found this episode useful. If you did, then why not basically come and let me know. hey, I always like to talk to you on Instagram, wherever. If you go to @iron_paradise_fitness, you can find me there. Drop me a DM, maybe even a follow, maybe even like a few posts that are knocking around. Why the hell not? And like I said before at the start of the show, if you like the show, hit subscribe, notifications, all that sort of good stuff. And I always like to see the podcast pop up on social media. That's always really cool for me to see. So yeah, props to you if you do that. But all I'm going to say for now is thanks so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next episode of the show.